Thomas sat on a worn bench at an old train station. The faint drizzle tapped against his coat, soaking through to his skin. A thin fog curled around the tracks, and the distant hum of trains passing by seemed to echo his thoughts, cold, restless, and empty. Everything he'd built over the last 5 years had collapsed in a single month. His business was gone. His wife had left, taking their children with her. Now he was here, with 2 suitcases and a hollow ache in his chest. He looked across the street at a cafe glowing with warm light. Inside, strangers laughed, clinked coffee cups, and argued about small, insignificant things. None of them knew that his life had fallen apart. None of them cared. His heart felt heavy, and his mind spiraled with the same bitter question over and over. Why me? Why did everything crumble? He felt invisible, forgotten, and worst of all, defeated. As he stared blankly at the wet pavement, a man sat down next to him. He was older, dressed simply, with a calm expression and a faint, reassuring smile. Without a word, the stranger pulled a worn-out book from his bag and handed it to Thomas. "You look like someone searching for answers," the man said softly. Thomas frowned. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter. Just someone who used to sit exactly where you are now. Take it." Thomas looked at the cover. It read, "The Power of Positive Thinking." He let out a dry laugh. "Positive thinking? It's a little late for that, don't you think?" The stranger smiled warmly, unshaken. "Believe me, the darkest nights come before the brightest dawns. Just open it." Thomas hesitated, but flipped to the first page. His eyes caught the very first sentence. "Change your thoughts, and you change your life." He scoffed, but something about those words stuck. "You think reading this is going to fix everything?" he asked bitterly. The man's voice was calm but firm. "I think you've been seeing the world through pain for so long that pain is all you see. Change the lens, and the world changes with it." Those words hit him harder than he expected. He stared at the book again, feeling a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't broken beyond repair. That night, under the flickering streetlight and the drizzle of rain, Thomas opened the book and began to read. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would not just change his life. It would set off a chain of events that would touch countless others. That was the night Thomas took his first step. A single page turned in the dark would soon lead him to a future he never thought possible.
The next morning, Thomas sat in a cramped hostel room with peeling wallpaper and a single flickering lamp. He hadn't slept much. Instead, he'd spent most of the night reading, underlining and rereading certain lines from The Power of Positive Thinking. But now, as sunlight crept through the dusty curtains, a strange thought entered his mind. Maybe I can climb out of this hole. For weeks, maybe months, his thoughts had been nothing but poison. Every morning felt like a reminder of failure. But this book, this old, wrinkled book, felt like someone whispering into his ear, "It's not over yet." He flipped to a passage he'd marked and read, "You are not what has happened to you. You are what you decide to become." Thomas closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he imagined a different version of himself. Not a man who had lost everything, but a man who had endured, survived, and was still here. The thought was small, fragile, but powerful enough to make him sit straighter. He stood in front of the cracked mirror, looking at his reflection. His eyes were tired, his hair unkempt, his face hollow. But there was something new there. Determination. All right, let's see if this works. He grabbed a pen and a scrap of paper and wrote down a single goal. I will rebuild my life. It wasn't specific, it wasn't even realistic yet, but it was a start. That afternoon, he walked to a nearby park. He sat on a bench, notebook in hand, and began writing everything he could imagine about his future. Not just what he wanted, but how it would feel. A small apartment filled with sunlight. A job he didn't dread waking up for. The ability to pay for his kids' school supplies without anxiety. A smile on his face that wasn't forced. For the first time, these weren't painful reminders of what he'd lost. They were a vision of what could still be. But the book had one more lesson that hit him hard. Your thoughts shape your reality, but thoughts alone are not enough. Speak them, live them, act on them every day. Thomas realized something. Hope was useless without action. So he made a decision. Starting tomorrow, he would live differently, no matter how small the steps were. He would train his mind to reject negativity, even if it took every ounce of his strength. That night, instead of lying in bed replaying his failures, he whispered something out loud to himself. I will win this battle. I'm not done yet. It felt strange, embarrassing even. But as those words left his lips, he felt a flicker of energy. Maybe this was how rebuilding started. Not with giant leaps, but with whispers in the dark. That whisper would grow louder. In a world that had beaten him down, Thomas was about to learn the most dangerous weapon of all, an unshakable mind. The next morning, Thomas woke up earlier than usual. Not because he felt rested, he didn't. His body still ached from stress and lack of proper sleep. But something had shifted in his mind. A quiet voice pushed him out of bed. He shuffled to the small wooden desk in his room, grabbed his notebook, and wrote down the same words he'd whispered last night. I will rebuild my life. This time, he underlined it twice. The book had a simple but powerful exercise. Start your day with gratitude. It sounded cliché, almost ridiculous, considering his life was in shambles. But he decided to try anyway. On the page, he wrote, I'm alive. I still have my health. I have a second chance. For a moment, his chest felt lighter. He wasn't fixed. He wasn't suddenly happy. But something deep inside him started to fight back against the heavy fog that had followed him for years. That morning, he forced himself outside for a walk. The air was crisp and cold, biting his cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, he noticed the sound of birds, the smell of wet grass, the rhythm of his own footsteps. This is life, he thought. I'm still here, and I can still change. Over the next few days, he made small, almost invisible changes. Instead of spending hours scrolling on his phone, he read a chapter of the book every night. He wrote down a positive affirmation every morning. When negative thoughts crept in, he countered them with 3 positive ones, no matter how silly it felt. At first, it was exhausting. His mind resisted every step, dragging him back to old habits. But Thomas remembered another line from the book. Your thoughts are like a muscle. The more you train them to be strong, the stronger they become. And so, every day, he trained. One night, after a long walk, he passed by a bustling cafe. The smell of roasted coffee and fresh pastries drifted into the street. He hesitated for a moment.
then pushed the door open. It felt strange to be around people again, but he decided to stay, order a coffee, and sit by the window. As he sat there, he looked at a young couple laughing together, a man typing away on his laptop, and a barista humming softly as she worked. For a brief moment, Thomas felt something warm, hope. Maybe life wasn't out of reach after all. Before leaving, he wrote one more thing in his notebook. I am rebuilding my mind. My life will follow. And for the first time in months, he slept peacefully.
Weeks passed, and Thomas's small daily rituals started to feel less like chores and more like anchors keeping him steady. He still had dark days, moments when fear whispered in his ear, when the emptiness of his apartment seemed louder than any city noise outside. But now he had weapons. Every morning, before even touching his phone, he grabbed his notebook and wrote 3 things. One thing he was grateful for, one affirmation, one goal for the day. Some days the goals were tiny, like take a 20-minute walk or clean the kitchen. Other days they were bolder, apply for a new job or reach out to an old friend. One evening, as he flipped through the book, a sentence seemed to leap off the page. What you think about, you bring about. At first, it sounded like some cheesy self-help slogan, but Thomas decided to test it. Instead of saying, I'm unlucky or I can't get out of this mess, he started speaking to himself differently. I attract opportunities. I am capable of rebuilding my future. Every day, I grow stronger. It felt fake at first, like he was lying to himself. But slowly, something strange happened. His actions started to match his words. One morning, while walking through the park, he noticed a small flyer pinned to a post. Local community center, volunteers needed. He almost ignored it. His old self would have. But the new Thomas paused. His heart beat faster. That evening, he showed up at the center. He spent hours helping elderly people organize groceries and chatting with them. At first, he felt out of place, awkward even, but something inside him shifted as he saw their grateful smiles. By the end of the day, he felt lighter than he had in years. That night, he wrote in his notebook, "Helping others makes me feel alive." It was a breakthrough. He realized that positive thinking wasn't just about repeating affirmations, it was about action, real action. Soon, volunteering became a weekly habit, then twice a week. He started recognizing faces, laughing with strangers, and even looking forward to each visit. The fog in his mind began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. But with progress came fear. Fear of slipping back, fear of failing again, fear that this happiness was temporary. Thomas stared at himself in the mirror one night, gripping the bathroom sink. "I've come too far," he whispered. "I won't go back." And he meant it. That evening, he made a promise. "I will rebuild my life, and I'll inspire others to do the same." The next day, he did something bold. He signed up for a public speaking workshop at the community center. For a man who once hid from the world, standing in front of strangers was terrifying. But Thomas didn't know this single decision would change the entire trajectory of his life.
The evening of the workshop arrived faster than Thomas expected. He stood outside the community center, palms sweaty, heart racing, clutching a small notebook filled with messy scribbles. He almost turned around. "Who am I to stand up there?" he muttered under his breath. "I'm no expert. I'm just a guy who messed up his life." But then he remembered something he'd written weeks ago. Courage is taking action despite fear.
He exhaled, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The room was small, but bright. A semicircle of chairs faced a single microphone stand. About a dozen people were already seated, some chatting nervously, others staring at their notes. Nobody seemed like a professional speaker. When his name was called, Thomas's legs felt like lead. He forced himself forward, step by shaky step, until he was standing in front of the microphone. The room fell silent. For a moment, he froze. The old voices in his head screamed, "You're not good enough. You'll embarrass yourself. You're a failure." But then he remembered something he'd written weeks ago. Courage is taking action despite fear. He exhaled, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The room was small, but bright. A semicircle of chairs faced a single microphone stand. About a dozen people were already seated, some chatting nervously, others staring at their notes. Nobody seemed like a professional speaker. When his name was called, Thomas's legs felt like lead. He forced himself forward, step by shaky step, until he was standing in front of the microphone. The room fell silent. For a moment, he froze. The old voices in his head screamed, "You're not good enough. You'll embarrass yourself. You're a failure." But then he saw a face in the audience. An elderly man from the food pantry, the same man Thomas had helped carry groceries a week ago. The man's eyes lit up with recognition, and he gave him a small nod. It was all Thomas needed. He took a deep breath and spoke, not with rehearsed lines or fancy words, just raw honesty. "I used to think my life was over," he began. His voice trembled but grew steadier with each word. "I thought I was broken, useless. I spent months sitting alone in my apartment replaying every mistake I'd ever made, convinced I'd never get back up. But then I picked up a book. This book taught me something simple but powerful, that our thoughts create our reality. That I wasn't just a victim of my circumstances, I was a participant in them, and that I could change my life if I changed my mind first." He told them about his gratitude lists, his daily affirmations, his first terrifying step into volunteering. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He admitted how many times he'd wanted to quit, how hard it had been to silence the negative voice in his head. When he finished, the room was quiet. For a terrifying second, Thomas thought he'd failed. Then a woman in the back raised her hand. "Thank you," she said softly, tears in her eyes. I needed to hear that today." The dam broke. People started clapping, not polite applause, but a heartfelt, thunderous round of appreciation. Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the fake kind that comes from ego, but the deep, soul-filling kind that comes from surviving your darkest days and daring to share it. After the workshop, several attendees approached him. One woman hugged him, saying his story gave her hope. A man asked for his advice on starting over. For the first time in his adult life, Thomas wasn't just existing, he was impacting others. That night, he walked home under the glow of city lights, his steps lighter than ever. He opened his notebook and wrote in bold letters, "This is just the beginning." Thomas didn't know it yet, but this single night would spark a chain reaction, opportunities, new connections, and a future brighter than he had ever imagined. Weeks turned into months, and Thomas's life began to shift in ways he never thought possible. He kept volunteering at the pantry, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He realized that helping others was healing parts of himself that therapy and medication never could. His talks became more frequent. At first, it was just the small community center. Then he was invited to speak at local schools, rehab programs, and small conferences. The man who once doubted if he deserved a second chance was now inspiring others to take theirs. But the most powerful moment came one rainy afternoon. Thomas was walking home, umbrella in hand,
when he saw a man sitting on the same park bench where Thomas himself had once cried and contemplated giving up. The man's shoulders were hunched, his eyes distant. Something about him felt painfully familiar. Without hesitation, Thomas walked over, sat down next to him, and simply said, "I know it's hard right now. I've been where you are." The man blinked at him in surprise. Thomas handed him a coffee and shared his story, not the polished version, but the raw truth. For the first time in months, the stranger smiled. That night, Thomas realized something profound. All his pain had been preparing him for this moment. His struggles weren't meaningless. They had shaped him into someone capable of guiding others out of the darkness. From that day forward, Thomas made a promise. He would dedicate his life to spreading hope. He started writing articles and sharing his story online. Videos of his speeches gained traction, inspiring people across the world. Soon, organizations invited him to speak on bigger stages. He wasn't rich, and fame wasn't his goal, but he was fulfilled. One evening, after giving a powerful keynote speech, Thomas walked off stage to a standing ovation. Backstage, he sat down, tears filling his eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. He whispered to himself, "All I did was change my thoughts, and it changed everything." The story of Thomas isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. We all have moments where we feel like giving up. But the power of positive thinking isn't just a cliché. It's a tool, a discipline, a way to rewrite your life script. Your mind can be your prison, or it can be your ladder out. The choice is yours. If one man could climb out of rock bottom with nothing but a shift in mindset, imagine what you can do. Start small. Start today. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Thomas didn't know it yet, but this single night would spark a chain reaction, opportunities, new connections, and a future brighter than he'd ever imagined.